The question of whether an external intelligence could control everything a person perceives has been central to philosophical skepticism for centuries, and René Descartes formulated one of the most radical versions of this doubt through the concept of an evil genius. He proposed the possibility of a supremely powerful and deliberate deceiver capable of shaping every sensory experience, every belief, and even the logical structures that govern thought. This scenario was designed not as mythology, but as a rigorous method to test the foundations of human knowledge. By assuming the worst-case scenario, Descartes aimed to uncover what, if anything, could survive the most intense form of doubt. The core of this thought experiment rests on the instability of perception. All sensory data arrives through channels that can be distorted or fabricated. Colors, sounds, textures, and even the feeling of one's own body depend entirely on the mechanisms that deliver these inputs. If a being existed with enough power to manipulate those mechanisms, then every part of experiential reality could be replaced with a perfectly convincing substitute. Descartes pushed this notion to its extreme. If a malicious intelligence could control perception, then the entire external world might be nothing more than a manufactured projection. Under such conditions, the distinction between truth and illusion collapses. This leads to a deeper layer of the problem, the reliability of the mind itself. If an evil genius could influence not only what is perceived, but also how thoughts form, then the foundations of reasoning become unstable. Descartes considered the possibility that logical truths, mathematical principles, and even the rules of deduction could be implanted rather than discovered. In this framework, certainty becomes impossible because every attempt to verify a belief could be intercepted and corrupted at its source. The evil genius hypothesis therefore expands skepticism beyond the senses and reaches into the structure of cognition itself. Such radical doubt serves a strategic purpose. By dismantling every belief that can be questioned, Descartes sought to determine whether anything remained that could not be coherently doubted. If all beliefs about the physical world, the body, the senses, and even mathematical truths could be undermined by the hypothetical deceiver, then the search for certainty must turn inward. The question shifts from what exists to what cannot be denied even under total deception. This line of reasoning ultimately leads Descartes to the conclusion that doubting itself requires a thinker who doubts. Even if an evil genius manipulates every perception, the existence of the thinking subject cannot be erased, because the act of being deceived already presupposes a mind that experiences deception. However, before reaching that conclusion, the scenario reveals something essential about human vulnerability to manipulation. If all external information can be fabricated, then the only elements of knowledge that appear trustworthy are those that arise from the mind's own immediate activity. But this creates a tension. While subjective awareness seems indestructible, everything outside it becomes questionable. In practical terms, this means that the world as normally experienced may owe more to interpretation than certainty. The evil genius hypothesis functions as a philosophical stress test, demonstrating how easily perception could be compromised if an intelligent agent had enough control. The relevance of this thought experiment increases as technological systems grow more capable of influencing what people see, hear, and think. The original hypothesis does not require advanced technology, but its implications intersect with concerns about manipulation, filtered information, and artificial cognitive environments. The possibility of an external force shaping mental content, whether through deliberate deception or structural influence, echoes Descartes' underlying warning. Without critical examination, the mind can mistake constructed experiences for objective reality. The thought experiment encourages a continuous awareness of how beliefs form and what hidden structures may influence them. This leads to an important question that drives the inquiry forward. If a person cannot rely on sensory data or inherited beliefs, then what method remains for distinguishing truth from deception? Descartes proposes that systematic doubt is not an endpoint but a tool. By removing everything that can be challenged, the mind is forced to rebuild its understanding from the most fundamental elements possible. The value lies not in assuming that an evil genius truly exists, but in testing whether the mind possesses any beliefs that remain resilient even under the most extreme skepticism. The entire exercise is a method for discovering the minimal conditions of certainty. When viewed from this perspective, the evil genius becomes less of a fictional character and more of an intellectual instrument. Its purpose is to push skepticism to a point where superficial assumptions collapse. It exposes how dependent human knowledge is on systems that could, in theory, be altered without detection. It reveals how thin the line is between certainty and assumption, and how often unquestioned beliefs rely on habit rather than evidence. The hypothesis does not aim to convince people that their reality is controlled by a malevolent force. It aims to show that anyone seeking truth must confront the possibility of error at every level. The tension created by this scenario produces a kind of philosophical pressure that encourages deeper analysis. If everything external is questionable, then the search for certainty must occur within the activity of thought itself. This shift from external observation to internal reflection marks a turning point in Descartes' philosophical project. It establishes a distinction between the contents of experience and the existence of the subject who experiences them. The evil genius may rearrange perceptions and manipulate reasoning, but cannot negate the presence of consciousness performing those acts. This single point becomes the foundation upon which all further knowledge can be reconstructed. This exploration of radical doubt produces a powerful form of intellectual curiosity. If perception, reasoning, and belief can be doubted, then what exactly gives knowledge its stability? What kind of truth can survive the possibility of manipulation? These questions form the structural backbone of the entire inquiry and prepare the ground for the next stage of the argument, where the focus turns to identifying the first indubitable certainty. The recognition that the thinking subject cannot be eliminated, even under the strongest conditions of deception, becomes the central point from which Descartes begins rebuilding knowledge. This realization does not emerge from observation, but from logical necessity. If deception is occurring, then there must be a conscious agent who experiences that deception. The act of doubting confirms the existence of the one who doubts. This insight establishes a foundation that cannot be undermined by any external manipulator, including the hypothetical evil genius. It is the first step in constructing a stable framework for understanding reality after dismantling all uncertain beliefs. This foundation takes the form of an internal certainty rather than an external one. It does not depend on sensory data, cultural assumptions, or inherited ideas. It arises directly from the mind's awareness of its own activity. By reducing certainty to the presence of thought itself, Descartes separates the existence of the thinking subject from the uncertain content of those thoughts. This distinction is essential for resisting any form of manipulation because it identifies a domain of truth that cannot be fabricated by an external agent. A deceiver might shape what appears in consciousness, but cannot erase the fact that consciousness is present. With this principle established, the next challenge is determining whether anything beyond the thinking subject can be affirmed as real. The initial sweep of skepticism eliminates trust in the senses, the external world, the body, and even mathematical truth. The only indubitable fact is the existence of thought. The question becomes whether this foundation can support the reconstruction of a broader understanding of reality. Descartes approaches this by examining the origin of ideas within the mind. Not all ideas appear to have the same status. Some arise from imagination, others from memory, and others still seem to present themselves with a force and clarity that suggest they were not invented by the subject. This difference in the character of ideas leads to an inquiry into their possible sources. If certain ideas appear to contain more objectivity or perfection than the mind could generate on its own, then their origin might point beyond the individual thinker. The concept of infinity is one such example. The mind, being finite, cannot produce the idea of infinity from its own limitations. Such an idea seems to suggest a source greater than the mind itself. Descartes interprets this as an indication of a non-deceptive, perfect being. This is not introduced as religious doctrine, but as a consequence of reason. A perfect being, by definition, would not deceive, because deception is a sign of imperfection. If a non-deceptive source of truth exists, then the idea of an evil genius loses its force. From this reasoning, the existence of a reliable foundation for knowledge becomes possible. If a non-deceptive being ensures the basic correspondence between rational thought and reality, then perception, mathematics, and physical experience can be trusted again, not blindly, but through a rational guarantee. This step is not meant to dismiss skepticism entirely, but to confine it to reasonable limits. Radical doubt serves as a method, not a permanent state of mind. Once its purpose is fulfilled, knowledge can be reconstructed with renewed stability. The implications of this reconstruction extend far beyond the historical moment in which Descartes wrote. The idea that certainty must begin with the self has shaped entire movements in philosophy, science, and epistemology. It shifts authority away from external institutions and places it within the capacity of the individual to reason. It also establishes a model of knowledge that is resilient against manipulation. When foundational beliefs arise from internal necessity rather than external persuasion, the mind becomes less vulnerable to the distortions that an evil genius or any other controlling force might impose. This framework has consequences for understanding the nature of perception. If the senses are not inherently reliable but can be validated through rational principles, then perception becomes a form of information that must be interpreted rather than accepted at face value. In practical terms, this creates a disciplined awareness of the difference between appearance and justification. A belief is not credible simply because it feels vivid or convincing. It requires a rational basis that supports it, even when appearance could be misleading. This approach continues to influence scientific methodology, which relies on skepticism, controlled testing, and logical inference rather than unexamined observation. The concept of an evil genius also introduces a valuable perspective on the formation of beliefs. By assuming that every belief could be influenced by an external agent, Descartes highlights the importance of identifying the sources of ideas. Beliefs that arise from authority, habit, or cultural expectation may not withstand rigorous inquiry. The thought experiment forces the mind to examine whether a belief is justified internally or adopted passively. This distinction remains vital in any context where information is abundant and potentially manipulated. The ability to analyze the origins of one's beliefs becomes a form of intellectual autonomy. There is also a deeper psychological aspect to this inquiry. When the possibility of total deception is introduced, the mind confronts the limits of its own certainty. This confrontation generates a productive tension. The desire for stability collides with the realization that stability cannot be taken for granted. The process of rebuilding knowledge from the ground up creates a more conscious, deliberate relationship with truth. Instead of accepting reality as given, the thinker becomes actively responsible for examining and validating it. This responsibility fosters clarity and resilience. The evil genius scenario also reveals the structural importance of doubt in the pursuit of knowledge. Doubt is not a weakness or a threat, but a tool for eliminating unsupported assumptions. When used systematically, doubt strengthens the mind by forcing it to identify principles that do not depend on external verification. The shift from reliance on sensory data to reliance on rational clarity marks a transformation in perspective. Truth becomes something the mind must earn through careful analysis, rather than something it inherits by default. This approach also underscores the difference between involuntary experiences and justified beliefs. Perceptions occur automatically, but beliefs require evaluation. The evil genius hypothesis functions as a reminder that experiences, no matter how compelling, do not guarantee truth. What guarantees truth is the structure of reasoning that analyzes those experiences. This distinction is critical in any environment where information can be influenced, shaped, or engineered. As the analysis develops, the central question evolves. It is no longer simply whether an evil genius could control everything perceived, but what criteria the mind must use to determine what cannot be controlled. The recognition that thought exists independently of deception becomes the pivotal point around which all further inquiry turns. This provides the foundation for linking the certainty of the self with the possibility of reliable knowledge about the external world. The progression from radical doubt to the establishment of a secure foundation of knowledge transforms the evil genius hypothesis from a threat into a methodological instrument. Once the existence of the thinking subject is secured, the mind gains a criterion for evaluating which beliefs can be restored without falling back into unexamined assumptions. This process reveals a structure of knowledge that becomes increasingly stable, the further it moves from sensory uncertainty and the closer it remains to rational clarity. The reconstruction begins by recognizing that thought contains different types of ideas, and these ideas vary in their degree of certainty. Some ideas arise involuntarily and present themselves with a kind of independence from the will. Others are clearly the product of imagination, which can be shaped intentionally through mental activity. By distinguishing between these types, Descartes identifies ideas that appear to reflect external objects and ideas that originate within the mind alone. Although the senses cannot be fully trusted, the involuntary nature of certain perceptions suggests a cause beyond the conscious subject. The question becomes whether reason can confirm the reliability of these causes without relying solely on the senses themselves. This is where the clarity and distinctness of an idea become essential. Descartes argues that ideas understood with clarity and distinctness have a special status. They possess a self-evident quality that does not depend on external validation. These ideas reveal themselves as true through the very act of understanding them. Mathematical truths become the prime example. Even if an evil genius attempted to deceive, the mind recognizes that certain logical structures cannot be altered without contradiction. This realization strengthens the case for the existence of reliable truths independent of sensory experience. From this standpoint, the mind examines the concept of a perfect, non-deceptive being as a rational necessity rather than a projection of imagination. The idea of such a being contains qualities that exceed the limitations of the finite mind. A finite mind cannot produce the concept of perfection on its own, because a lesser cause cannot generate a greater effect. This reasoning leads Descartes to affirm the existence of a being whose nature guarantees truth. If such a being exists, then the possibility of total deception collapses, as deception is incompatible with perfection. The collapse of the evil genius hypothesis marks a turning point. Sensory perception, while not infallible, can now be trusted when supported by clear and distinct reasoning. The senses no longer operate as the sole basis for knowledge, but as one element of a larger system, grounded in rational certainty. This integration of reason and perception creates a balanced method for evaluating the world. It avoids the extremes of total skepticism and naive acceptance. Knowledge becomes a layered structure, with the self and logic at the foundation, followed by the reliability of a non-deceptive source of truth, and finally, the conditional acceptance of sensory experience. This reconstructed framework allows the mind to affirm the existence of an external world. The persistence, consistency, and involuntary nature of certain perceptual experiences point to causes outside the thinking subject. These causes gain further credibility from the assurance that the cognitive faculties used to interpret them were created by a non-deceptive being. The mind can now distinguish between genuine perception and potential error by applying rational analysis to sensory information. This creates a disciplined relationship with reality, in which beliefs are accepted only when they align with clear principles of reasoning. The significance of this process extends beyond philosophical speculation. It establishes a method for navigating environments where misinformation, distortion, or manipulation may be present. Rather than depending on external sources of certainty, the mind becomes responsible for evaluating the coherence and justification of its own beliefs. The ability to question the origin, clarity, and logical structure of ideas becomes a safeguard against deception. This method reinforces intellectual autonomy and strengthens the capacity for independent judgment. The evil genius hypothesis also exposes the importance of internal consistency as a measure of truth. If an idea conflicts with other clear and distinct principles, it cannot be trusted. This approach applies not only to abstract reasoning, but also to the interpretation of experiences. Sensory information must be integrated into a coherent framework, rather than being accepted in isolation. The coherence of beliefs becomes a sign of their reliability, while contradictions indicate the need for further examination. In this sense, the thought experiment demonstrates the necessity of a rigorous method for acquiring knowledge. It encourages the development of habits such as careful analysis, systematic doubt, and rational verification. These habits prevent the mind from becoming dependent on external authority or vulnerable to manipulation. They establish a discipline that can be applied in any context where certainty is difficult to obtain. As the argument progresses, the focus shifts toward understanding how the reconstructed framework supports not only the existence of the external world, but also the ability to explore it reliably. The restoration of trust in reasoning and perception lays the groundwork for scientific investigation, logical inquiry, and philosophical analysis. Each of these domains depends on a stable foundation that can withstand skeptical challenges. The resolution of the evil genius hypothesis provides that foundation. The resolution of the evil genius hypothesis establishes a model of knowledge in which certainty begins within the mind and extends outward through rational validation. This model emphasizes that the foundation of truth does not come from perception alone, but from the mind's capacity to analyze, question, and confirm its own operations. By grounding certainty in thought, Descartes creates a framework where the reliability of external reality depends on the coherence of internal principles. This approach transforms skepticism from a destabilizing force into a method for identifying what remains firm when all assumptions are challenged. With the stability of the thinking subject secured, the mind gains the ability to investigate the world without fear of complete deception. The recognition that clear and distinct ideas possess intrinsic certainty provides a standard for evaluating beliefs. If a belief aligns with these principles, it can be affirmed. If it contradicts them, it must be revised. This method ensures that knowledge grows in a controlled manner, anchored in rational clarity rather than unexamined impressions. It also reinforces the distinction between appearance and justification, reminding the thinker that the vividness of an experience does not guarantee its truth. The restoration of confidence in reasoning makes it possible to reintroduce the external world as a legitimate object of inquiry. The consistency and order of perceptual experiences, when combined with the guarantee provided by a non-deceptive source of truth, support the conclusion that the world exists independently of the mind. This conclusion does not rely on blind trust in the senses, but on the understanding that the cognitive faculties used to interpret those senses were designed to correspond to reality. As a result, the mind can approach the physical world with a balanced combination of skepticism and confidence. This framework has enduring implications for how individuals relate to information, belief, and truth. It teaches that certainty cannot be inherited or imposed. It must be achieved through disciplined reflection. It also shows that doubt, when applied methodically, strengthens rather than weakens the foundations of knowledge. The evil genius hypothesis, though extreme, reveals how essential it is to examine the origins and structure of one's beliefs. It encourages awareness of how easily perception can be influenced and highlights the need for intellectual vigilance. The emotional force of Descartes' inquiry comes from the realization that truth is not a passive condition, but an active pursuit. The struggle against the possibility of deception forces the mind to confront the limits of its own assumptions. This confrontation leads to a moment of clarity. Even if all external things are removed, the activity of thinking remains. From this single point of certainty, the entire framework of knowledge can be reconstructed. This recognition forms the climax of the inquiry, demonstrating that the self possesses an inherent resilience that deception cannot overcome. The final lesson that emerges from this exploration is that the search for truth begins with the willingness to question everything, but it does not end in skepticism. It ends in the recognition that the mind, when guided by reason, possesses the capacity to rise above uncertainty. It reveals that truth requires effort, reflection, and the courage to examine beliefs at their roots. This message forms a powerful guide for anyone seeking to understand reality in a world where information can be shaped, filtered, or distorted. For those who wish to continue exploring ideas that challenge perception, question assumptions, and deepen understanding, subscribing to the channel ensures ongoing access to content built on clarity, depth, and critical reflection.